Welcome to the video on the Russian Revolution. Here's kind of a very quick overview of the revolution that Russia experiences in 1917, and then we'll obviously go more into depth into the components of the revolution and the consequences. The year of the Russian Revolution, 1917, there's actually two revolutions within Russia in 1917. One, the February Revolution, which removes the Romanov family from power. And then in October, a second revolution takes hold of Russia that brings the Bolshevik Communist Party to Russia and into power in Russia and establishes the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And this will be the communist government, the Bolshevik communist government that rules Russia for much of the 20th century. Now, as we look at the Russian Revolution of 1917, we have to look at why Russia entered into a revolutionary era in 1917, and certainly the immediate answer to that is Russia experiences a national collapse during World War I. The society buckles under the strain of World War I, and the government specifically not up to the task in managing the immense pressure that World War I brought upon the society. Now, as we look at why Russia was unable to meet the needs and survive as a society during World War I, we need look no further than the czarist system of absolute monarchy that the Romanov family had presided over. Nicholas II, he's essentially the last absolute monarch in all of Europe. He's going to be the last Tsar of Russia. If you'll remember, Nicholas II had been very resistant to any type of reforms. He had resisted changes. Even after the humiliating defeat of Russia by the Japanese in 1905, he had briefly introduced a parliamentary system of government by allowing the Russian Duma or parliament to form. But then once the Duma started to disagree with his autocratic decision-making, he immediately disbanded the parliament. So Russia political system organized under an absolute monarchy was ill-prepared to meet the demands that World War I placed upon the society. And Russia is the one society that is going to completely buckle under the strains of World War I, and it will do so on all fronts. Russia will falter and fail on the war front, and Russia will falter and fail on the home front simultaneously. So let's start by taking a look at the war front. Russia performs miserably in World War I against German forces on the Eastern Front. And let me flip to the map here real quick. You can see the Western Front, a more limited scope of territory as the adversarial sides dug into a trench warfare situation. You can see the Eastern Front here between Russia and Germany, a much more fluid front. And Germany deals Russia defeat after defeat after defeat. This is going to sap Russian morale to a tremendous degree. And here we look back to the statistics. Nearly 2 million killed. Now you look at the casualties, well over almost 5 million wounded. You've got well over 2 million prisoners of war. And you look at the overall casualty rate, and casualties is killed plus wounded plus taken prisoner. 3 out of every 4 Russian soldiers was either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. That is a meltdown of a military performance. The Russian military collapses during this time. And you've got a poor training of the soldiers. The soldiers are very poorly equipped. Russia is not up to the industrial standards of Germany on the Eastern Front. Germany deals Russia defeat after defeat after defeat on the Eastern Front. You can see the immense numbers that Russia puts into the field, but the quality the quality of soldier and the technology that they had were very poor. Russia's government, because it was organized under an absolute monarchy, was not able to respond very well to the challenges that the Russian army faced on the Eastern Front, and even something like properly supplying the troops, with proper clothes or food. Russia was not up to the task and was unable to meet the tremendous strain that World War I placed on the society. Now, on the home front, things were no better. And Nicholas II actually left the capital of St. Petersburg and went to the battlefront to try to rally the troops. On the home front, you have similar types of breakdowns. The government was not organized enough to properly ration food. So what you have are urban workers going increasingly hungry. You have the cities are starting to experience food shortages. You have tremendous inflation at this time. People are tired of the war. A lot of people have had family members killed or wounded or taken prisoner. And the society really is tired of the war. They want Russia to get out of World War I altogether. Additionally, on the home front, there is unease amongst the Russian population because of the Romanovs' families' very close relationship with a kind of mystic faith healer by the name of Rasputin. Here's Rasputin here with the royal family on the home front. Here's the Tsarina Alexandra. The sole male heir to the Romanov throne, Prince Alexei, was a hemophiliac, and that's the medical condition where if you get cut, your blood has difficulty coagulating and stopping and stemming the flow of bleeding. So Rasputin, who was a faith healer, the family could not find any kind of suitable medical treatment at this time. So Rasputin, the faith healer, was one individual who had some luck assisting Alexei with his hemophilia. So the family started to rely on Rasputin more and more. And Rasputin, in the absence of Tsar Nicholas II, actually became more and more powerful on the home front. And people were wondering about the role of Rasputin, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with a self-proclaimed holy man running the domestic affairs of the entire society. And of course, as the home front and food shortages and economic decline of Russia take hold, along with the very poor war effort, there's increasing a disenchantment with the Romanovs' family relationship with Rasputin. In fact, Rasputin is become so unpopular amongst the Russian population in terms of his relationship with Tsarina Alexandra, and there were rumors that Rasputin and the Tsarina were also having sexual relations, that the assassination of Rasputin is planned by those loyal to the Romanov family, believing that by killing Rasputin, it would alleviate some of the public criticism that the Romanov family was experiencing for the very prominent role that Rasputin was playing. Now, the assassination of Rasputin is kind of a fascinating occurrence in that you've got these individuals who seek to kill Rasputin, believing he is doing a disservice in his advice to the Romanov family in terms of how to run the country. So initially they poison Rasputin, try to poison his food, and that doesn't kill him. Then they shoot Rasputin. The assassins who are loyal to the Romanov family shoot Rasputin, and he passes out for a time, but then wakes back up. He's shot twice more, including once in the head, and survives that further assassination attempt. Then the assassins beat Rasputin's head with a dumbbell, and he is relatively unconscious but still alive. And finally, they wrap Rasputin and tie him up in a rug and throw him in a river. And when the autopsy on Rasputin was done, the official post-mortem on him was a death by drowning. So you have this very odd character. There's a lot of rumors going around. People are very unhappy about the influence that he has on the home front, and that hurts the Romanov family as well. Now, the February Revolution comes about, and remember, this is the overthrow of the Romanov family in the February Revolution, not because people are really calling for the end of Romanov rule, but people go out into the streets in February mainly because they're hungry. The society is no longer functioning under Romanov rule. There's not enough food. So people go out into the streets to protest, to strike. You have growing unrest, but they're not actively calling for the end of Tsarist rule. Instead, they're just simply hungry and calling for bread. The Romanov family sends soldiers out to deal with the unrest, and the soldiers who want the war to end actually join the protesters, and that's the end of Romanov rule in February of 1917. So the Romanov family is now out of power in February 1917 because of popular unrest, not because the population was calling for the end of Romanov rule, but the Tsarist system is simply unsustainable by this point in time. The society cannot function under the traditional system. So the February Revolution is the end of Romanov rule, and the Romanovs had been in power ever since 1613. So here you see a 300-year-long dynasty concludes in February of 1917. This is the first of the traditional family dynasties to fall as a result of World War I, and we'll see the Hohenzollerns in Germany and the Habsburg family in Austria also lose power as an outcome of World War I eventually. Now, Russia being the only society to collapse during World War I, before its conclusion. And what the February Revolution does is it brings to power a provisional government. The provisional government. There we go. Sorry about that. So there it is. So what you've got, the provisional government comes to power, and this is led by Kerensky. And here's a picture of Alexander Kerensky, the leader of the provisional government. Now, here's a little bit more information about the provisional government. What you've got here is provisional government, the provisional government is middle class dominated. And all the political parties in Russia participate in the provisional government, including all the socialist political parties except for Lenin's Bolshevik Party. The goal of the provisional government under Kerensky is to form a democratic system of government. Now, that's one source of power, but the provisional government, nobody knew, very few people in Russia knew who Kerensky was. It's middle class dominated. The middle class did not have a lot of political legitimacy at this time. The Duma had not been elected, like in an open election. This government had very, very little legitimacy. It had essentially no name recognition. You're talking about a government that's trying to pick up authority on the heels of a 300-year-long absolute monarchy, the last couple hundred years of which had been an absolute monarchy, starting with Peter the Great in the early 18th century. So the provisional government is not the only source of power. Another source of power are the Soviets, and the Soviets had been born in the absence of a functioning government during World War I. And these were councils. These were like local governing councils of workers, of soldiers. They would be established like in a factory or in a neighborhood. And these little political institutions or within a military unit, and these representative councils and political institutions had been established to create a local decision-making and governing on very local levels. Now, the Soviets claim to be the true representatives of the people, and this is where you get the term the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Soviet Socialist Republics is this local governing institution and representative governing institution of workers and soldier councils. So the provisional government is looking for greater authority and justification, and that's middle class dominated, but the Soviets, they claim to be the true representatives of the Russian people. So you've got these two different power sources after the fall of the Romanov family. Now, Lenin, as it says here, refuses to have anything to do with the provisional government. And Lenin is calling for even more revolutionary change. He refuses to work with anyone in the middle class. And remember, Lenin, as the leader of the Bolshevik Party, he doesn't believe that the dictatorship of the proletariat needs to wait for a middle class era. And that's why Marxist Leninism is different from traditional Marxism. Traditional Marxism, if you'll remember, says, okay, first you're going to have a traditional era, then there's going to be an era of middle class domination, but then eventually in a mass movement, the proletariat will overthrow the middle class. What Lenin is saying is no compromise with the provisional government. We don't want any compromise with the provisional government. We are going to go from a monarchy straight to a dictatorship of the proletariat, and in doing so, then we will hasten, meaning quicken, the arrival of communism. The provisional government makes a fatal mistake in its very brief time in power, in that it keeps Russia in the war. This is a fatal mistake. It's a misreading of the pulse of Russian society at this time. The Russians were done with the war. People wanted the soldiers to come home. They wanted Russia to be out from under the burden of the war that the society had been unable to unable to meet the strains of. The provisional government under Kerensky keeps Russia in the war, and the very little legitimacy that the liberal middle class had that led this government, this very short-lived government, is completely squandered. Lenin and the Soviets are calling for Russia to broker a peace deal, and Lenin is also calling for the end of the war. This is going to be a major shift in that Lenin is going to have a lot more popular appeal in this regard than the provisional government. So Kerensky makes a fatal mistake by keeping Russia in the war from February 1917 on. Lenin is building some support at this time with a couple of major slogans. His major slogan being peace, land, and bread. He wants to end the war, and he wants to distribute land to the peasantry. This is going to have a widespread popular appeal. Additionally, Lenin is calling for kind of all power to the Soviets. He's talking about a power to the people. And the Bolshevik Party, if you'll remember, the way it's organized is it's a revolutionary vanguard. It's an elite revolutionary movement. Lenin's not believing that there's going to be a mass uprising amongst the Russian people. Lenin is, his outlook is the Bolsheviks will seize power on behalf of the people. So he's calling on seizing power on behalf of the Soviets, and the Bolsheviks do just that in October of 1917. So in October of 1917, the provisional government has essentially no popular support or legitimacy. Lenin says, let's seize power now. Lenin literally says, and I quote, "History will not forgive us if we do not seize power now." Lenin believes it's time for the revolution. So on October 24th and 25th, 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power in the capital city of St. Petersburg. Again, this is not a revolutionary, a mass revolutionary action. Instead, it's a very small number of revolutionaries organized under the Bolshevik Party that take power in the capital city. And there's this is a monumental political change in Russian society, but there's essentially no resistance. I mean, nobody was willing to die for the provisional government. Nobody really associated themselves with the provisional government. The provisional government had no legitimacy, essentially, to begin with, and then the very little that they did have, they squandered by keeping Russia in the war. So you can see the Bolsheviks are able to seize power rather easily. I mean, 5 people are killed in this revolution, the Bolsheviks seize power of the capital city. And this is the birth of the USSR. It is the Bolshevik-dominated era of Russian history. The Bolsheviks, starting in October of 1917, will begin to seize power and consolidate power over Russia. And they will eventually form a one-party dictatorship over Russian society. They will have to fight a civil war to consolidate power over the entire society. Their movement initially is quite small, and they're able to seize power initially in the capital city and a number of other major metropolitan areas around Russia. We'll study the Civil War in greater depth later on. But this is the official birth of the USSR, the beginning of the establishment of Bolshevik one-party rule over Russian society. Thanks.